This is the first place where the Jews stopped wandering. This is where the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, rested for 369 years, right? This is where Hannah, taught the world how to pray, right? This is a very important place. So I said, what do you think about that? Would you give that away for peace? And they say, oh no, never. And these are secular people. Never. I said, well, why not? Well, this is part of our DNA. This is who we are as a people. I mean, if we give away it's like asking an American, would you give away the Statue of Liberty? Would you give away the Jefferson Memorial? I mean, these things just are not for sale.
Ambassador, when it comes to Jerusalem, I mean, first of all, it's one of the main stops in this incredible new film that you are the stars of, our TBN film Route 60, the Biblical Highway, in theaters, folks. Again, September 18th and 19th, go to route60.movie for more information. But hey, Shiloh, Nazareth, Hebron, Mount Ebal, Jerusalem, it's just absolutely incredible the stops you make. But Jerusalem, for you, in reading your book, Sledgehammer, you lay out how when you took this post, this was an agenda that you wanted to really focus on. It's about time to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Take us inside your thought process there. And it was a long and winding road, but you got there.
Well, look, it was something I was committed to do to the extent I was given the runway from the day I was appointed. It was even in the press release that announced my nomination. Look, people ask me sometimes, how did you know that there wouldn't be any violence? How'd you know? Because, you're talking about a big world out there. And how do you know that one guy somewhere, one lunatic's not going to throw a hand grenade into a crowd of people, right? And I'm telling you, if that would have happened, I would have gotten a call the next day from the president and saying, what have you done to me here? Like, what's going on? And I might have lost my job. So how did it happen? How were you so smart? The answer is, I wasn't. I didn't know. Nobody can know. It's not knowable, right, that nowhere in the world there's going to be any act of violence. But there wasn't any. And so, look, we did all the work that we could possibly do to assess the risks. And at the end of the day, we thought that the risks were manageable. But, I look back during those days to the book of Isaiah, chapter 2. And I would recommend everybody take a look at this, because in the second chapter of Isaiah, there was sort of the paradigm for peace that it says, nation will not lift up sword against nation or study war anymore, right? It's on the wall of the United Nations, right? It's what everybody sort of accepts as the end state. But they don't tell you how to get there, right? But Isaiah actually does, if you read a couple of verses earlier. And what he says is that the nations of the world, not the Jewish people, the nations of the world will all come to Jerusalem, whereupon God will resolve their differences, and then nation will not lift up sword against nation. Now, how does a nation come to Jerusalem? Right? You can't all pick up and go. Well, the one way a nation can actually establish its presence in another country is by moving its embassy. So Isaiah, 2,700 years ago, predicted that moving our embassy to Jerusalem would result in peace. In 2018, all the pundits, all the great minds, all of our predecessors were saying, you move the embassy to Jerusalem, you're going to have endless wars and irreconcilable conflicts. Isaiah said the opposite 2,700 years ago. Now, who was right? Right? Who was right? Isaiah.
I think the prophet was proven right. And I shook my head about that, gentlemen. During that whole process, the announcement was made December 2017, the embassy was moving, and people said, oh my word, this is going to set the Middle East on fire. I said, where have you been for like the last 2,000 years? It's been on fire for a while already. I'd be remiss as well if I did not mention the recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. As part of, I think, the Pompeo Doctrine, which I'd like to touch on again, Secretary. Look, we talk about Judea and Samaria obviously being the high ground in many ways, but whoever possesses the Golan, hey, you're looking down.
This is literally the high
Galilee.
ground.
Yes, it is literally the high ground. Tell us a bit about your thought process regarding that, and also how that really, the Golan, I said, when we're talking Pompeo Doctrine and the geopolitics of the region, you got to talk about Iran, really the head of the snake when it comes to terror in the region. Talk about your thought process there regarding pushing back Iran's advances, in particular in Syria.
So two thoughts I think are worth walking through. The Golan is so obviously central to Israeli security, and so fundamentally important to the Jewish people, right? This place matters. There have been Israelis have fought and died in that place. It is also, anybody who's had the chance to go there, this is pretty easy for visitors to get to, can see.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
When Christians go to Galilee, it's easy to get there. And you can see, just as a security matter, that this real estate matters.
Yeah.
And so it was important, and President Trump, again, with David Friedman full on in support, made the right decision. This was Israeli land for sure, and so this was a kind of an easy one for us. At the same time, we also knew that just across the border from the Golan is Syria, and in Syria you have huge Iranian operations. Yeah. The Iranians, when we came into office, were in the middle of negotiations that had concluded, or were at the end of negotiations that had concluded an agreement which put Israel at enormous risk. Had created a pathway for an Iranian nuclear weapons program. There's a lot of complexity around it, but suffice it to say, the world was a lot less safe as a result of that. So not only did President Trump make the decision to move our embassy to Jerusalem and to acknowledge the Golan Heights as the rightful land of Israel, but we got out of a bad deal that put our Israeli partner, at an enormous amount of risk. And the results of all of those, the cumulative results of all of those, were Gulf Arab nations saying, these are serious people in the United States. This is serious leadership in Israel. We want to be partners and part of what they're trying to do. And so we pushed back against the Iranian threat in serious ways. And it's incredibly important to the nation of Israel. It matters a lot to the Middle East. But if you think about families in the United States and whose son or daughter might sign up to be a Marine or join the Air Force, the risk that they'll have to go do something really hard in that really difficult place someday is simply lower as a result of the work that we did.
Yeah, and Ambassador, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to just interject something because Mike's too modest to mention it. But we were together in Israel when the Golan Heights announcement was made. It was
a big one.
And it wasn't something that either one of us was expecting. I mean, we were expecting after we spoke with the president, but until then, it wasn't something that was on the agenda for that particular visit. So it's, let's say it's 5 p.m. in Israel, and Mike and the prime minister are making joint statements at the prime minister's house 2 hours later. Right, and nobody was.
The tweet had gone out, if I recall, from then President Trump.
Yeah. So no one's thinking, you prepare for these things. These are not like spontaneous eruptions, right? So they were prepared for something. All of a sudden, the whole agenda changes, right? Because it's now about this historic decision on the Golan Heights. So Mike gets up there and he makes a speech, and I didn't know what he was going to talk about, and he starts talking about. The Battle of the Valley of Tears, right, which was in 1973. It was the turning point of the Yom Kippur War, where Israel finally turned the tide. A single soldier named Avigdor Kahalani, who won great awards in Israel, he managed to convince the Syrians that there were more tanks there than there really were for long enough until they got their reinforcement, right? So it turns out that Mike, wrote about this for his kind of senior thesis at West Point.
That's right.
So he's an expert on this. Nobody knew this. He's an expert. So he gets up without any notice. He starts talking about this historic battle. I'm sitting there like, where did that come from? But he's talking about this battle, and then he talks about how much it means to him that that we now know with certainty that the people who died in that battle, the Jews, the Israeli soldiers who died in that battle, will not have died in vain, because the Golan Heights that they fought so valiantly for will now be considered by not just Israel, but by the United States as Israeli sovereign territory. And it was a real moment. And then, some months or years later, I think towards the end of our time, I surprised him. He went to visit the Golan Heights, and I brought General Kahalani, who he didn't even know if he was still alive or not. I brought him, and they met there at the Golan Heights, and they were able to talk to each other.
That had to be a special moment.
It was very emotional, very special.
Yeah, and someone who served, we should have mentioned, Secretary, with distinction in the U.S. military as well. Folks, the film is called Route 60, The Biblical Highway. It is in theaters nationwide, September 18th and 19th. Go to route60.movie. And as you can see, you're getting not only, it's unique, I think, because we have a former Secretary of State, a former ambassador to Israel, but approaching things from a biblical perspective. So it's fascinating and unique, folks. You're going to enjoy it. Secretary, I wanted to add, when we talk about the Pompeo Doctrine and Iran, we'd be remiss not to mention the not so dearly departed terror master Qasem Soleimani, one of the key decisions you helped make in office as Secretary of State. We talk about the Valley of Tears ambassador and wars that Israel has fought. Perhaps some future wars were at least delayed in seeing him taken off the scene.
Well, the central responsibility for any Secretary of State is to reduce the risk of war. And we were at a point where the Iranians were beginning to threaten U.S. forces worldwide. We had an embassy, and the U.S. embassy in Baghdad was under attack nearly every night from artillery rounds. There were lots that we were slipping. Our deterrence was slipping. And then a bunch of work that had been done over the previous years, when I was CI director alongside Mossad, that work presented an opportunity. And we had a chance to take out this General Qasem Soleimani, who had killed 500 plus Americans. He had blood on his hands, and he was in fact traveling to commit further aggression against the United States. He was headed from Beirut to Damascus to Baghdad. And we had an opportunity to eliminate his capacity to ever kill another American. And so I went down with Secretary Esper and General Milley to Mar-a-Lago, briefed the president on something we'd been talking to him about for a long time. But now we had the opportunity and an active plot by General Soleimani to kill more Americans. The president gave the green light, and the U.S. Department of Defense executed an incredible mission, taking Qasem Soleimani from the battlefield. It was important in the moment. It saved lives in the near term, but very, very importantly, it also made clear that the Trump administration, when it drew a line, when it said, if you behave in a way that's inconsistent with the things we've told you you must do, that we will actually deliver the cost that we have told you we will impose. We drew a red line. When they crossed it, we responded exactly as we told them we would do. And I'm convinced that that saved an awful lot of the Iranian threat during the remaining time we had in office.
Yeah, true deterrence. And I think of another former president, I think we all admire, President Ronald Reagan, who said peace through strength. And we certainly saw that with the Qasem Soleimani elimination. Ambassador Friedman, what is the view, two questions here, what is the view in Israel generally about the Iran threat and Hamas and Hezbollah? You're on the ground, obviously, frequently still in Israel. And number two, how does the average Israeli feel? We know Secretary Pompeo and I, as American evangelicals, we love Judea, Samaria, we see the biblical heartland. How does the average Israeli feel about Route 60? Do they realize the spiritual significance of this incredible road?
So, because Israelis are right there, sometimes, you get caught up in daily lives, right? So they have to, feed their families and get the kids off to school. And the ones that aren't living there are not living there, and they're not there that frequently. But I'll tell you, here's what I think is noteworthy. So I've spoken to a lot of Israelis that don't live in Judea and Samaria, and I asked them about it. And I say, do you care about it? And they said, well, we care about it, but we don't go there that often because, when we travel, we tend to, go to Greece or Italy or America. So I said, well, what do you think about giving it away? They said, well, maybe if there was peace, we'd give away some of it. We're skeptical about peace right now, but so I said, let's pick a place, just hypothetically. Let's say the city of Shiloh, right? Shiloh in America, right? This is the first place where the Jews stopped wandering. This is where the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, rested for 369 years, right? This is where Hannah, taught the world how to pray, right? This is a very important place. So I said, what do you think about that? Would you give that away for peace? And they say, oh no, never. And these are secular people, never. I said, well, why not? Well, this is part of our DNA. This is who we are as a people. If we give away it's like asking an American, would you give away the Statue of Liberty? Would you give away the Jefferson Memorial? These things just are not for sale. They're not, and even secular Israelis, I believe, they still know the Bible. You still learn the Bible in school. And I believe that even they would be very resistant to conceding the holy sites. Because understand, if you give them away, not only do you never see them again, but they'll be destroyed. Look at we know, for example, the tomb of Joseph, right? Extremely important place to the Jewish people, to anyone who's a Bible believer. Every time there is any kind of a conflict.
And it's seen in the film, by the way.
Yes, and it's in the film.
Yeah.
It's in the film. We talk about it.
right.
But it gets destroyed and rebuilt every couple of years because the Palestinians regrettably would like to eliminate, our biblical connection to the land, and this is right within a very solid Palestinian community. So if you give this away, if you give any of these places away, not only do you never see them again, but they will cease to exist. And I don't believe that we can live in a world where the Jewish people or the Christian people, anyone of faith, can be detached from these incredibly holy places. Even if you only go there once in your life, it's enough.
Yes.
It's enough to recharge your batteries, to be a believer and to lead a faithful life. The next best thing is to watch the movie, right? and hopefully we'll get a lot of people to watch the movie. It will recharge people's batteries of faith.
Speaking of the film, let's go to a clip right now from Route 60, the Biblical Highway.
Deep within every lover of Israel is a desire to follow the path of Scripture where the heroes of our faith walk. Join David Friedman and Mike Pompeo as they guide you on just such a road. Israel's Route 60, a literal biblical highway, guiding travelers along sites key to Scripture. It's a close-up look at the land of the Bible as you've never seen it. Join us for this sacred journey of transformation and hope along Route 60, the Biblical Highway, in theaters September 18th and 19th.
Incredible, folks. Again, September 18th and 19th, Route 60, the Biblical Highway, is in theaters nationwide. Go to route60.movie. We have to talk about the Abraham Accords. You were both intimately involved in the Accords becoming a reality, seemingly against all odds to many people on the outside. But when we talk about the shaping of the modern Middle East and the positive, encouraging things that happened during your tenure, we have to talk about the Abraham Accords. Secretary, take us inside again. Take us inside the room at Foggy Bottom, a few minutes from here, the State Department in Washington, D.C. And was there an optimism? We know you were optimistic, and you wrote about this in your great book, Never Give an Inch. We know your optimism for peace between Israel and some of its Arab neighbors. What was the consensus among your colleagues? Were you kind of a voice crying in the wilderness there at the State Department?
Sure. Look, the State Department is an establishment institution that thinks what we did yesterday is the thing we should do tomorrow. And so when we were there breaking some glass, in a way that David wrote about in his book Sledgehammer, right? We were upending lots of history. And I'll let David begin the story, but it's important to put in context as we began to think about the Middle East, right? We knew that previous secretaries of state had done shuttle diplomacy. They'd go from Jerusalem to Ramallah and back and forth, and they'd argue over lines on a map endlessly. We recognized we'd be no more successful at that than anyone else. And so we took a fundamentally different approach. And David, maybe that's the place for you to start the story.
Well, look, we started off with the idea, directed by the president, that we should try to develop a plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. We quickly realized this was just a fool's errand. I mean, we could put something on a piece of paper, but anything that included a state of Israel on the map, whatever size and whatever dimensions, was going to be recognized by the Palestinians as a Jewish state, was going to be dead on arrival. So we said to ourselves, well, for the next 3 years or 4 years, however long we have, do we just, kind of lament our situation, or do we try to make progress? And what we found was that, the Gulf nations, which are strong allies of America, they don't hate Israel. They have issues with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but so do the Brits, right? So does Canada. So does India. So do a lot of countries that have relations with Israel still don't necessarily see eye to eye on the Palestinian conflict. So we said, well, can we put that off to the side? We're not going to resolve it. We may never resolve it. Okay, put that off to the side. Does Israel still have something to gain? Do these countries still have something to gain from normalizing with each other? And we found real receptivity on the part of these countries. And we discussed it. We walked it through. I worked mostly the Israeli side. Jared worked with with some of these Gulf nations. And then we thought we had a package that was 75% baked, and then we brought it over here to the Secretary of State and said, "Here, bring it home. See what you can do." And I think that's we were amazed we were amazed at the willingness on the part of both Israel and moderate Sunni nations, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, even Kosovo in Europe. We were amazed that they were willing to move on. You know, again, not to say we agree with any particular resolution to the Palestinian conflict, but we can agree to disagree and still do wonderful things among ourselves that will make the world a safer and more prosperous place.
In covering this gentleman for TBN, I've been to Bahrain, to the United Arab Emirates in the wake of the Abraham Accords, and the flights are full. It's absolutely miraculous, I would say even. It's amazing. Planes full of Israelis going back and forth to the UAE. Even 10 years ago, this was unthinkable. It seems like, as you both laid out, just plain common sense, but we live in times where common sense is not so common. So there was a great deal of pushback there. One of the great things about Route 60 is the film is completely apolitical. Obviously, you were leading government officials in previous administration, but this is purely from a biblical, I would say even a heart perspective, the film. But I have to ask you both, you played such obviously a pivotal leading role in making the Abraham Accords a reality. Are you a little bit disappointed that we haven't seen more nations come into the Accords since your tenure ended? A little surprised, maybe?
Disappointed for sure. What it took, Eric, to get it to the finish line is it took leadership. It took people who were prepared to take risks. Your point about the State Department. Look, if you go look at the early days where it began to leak out that we were working on this project, although I will say we were able to keep this very quiet for a very long time. But as it began to leak out, the resistance was enormous, right? Because it proved false what people had believed for decades, which is you can't fix this problem until you resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
What was that I'm sorry, Secretary, that comment John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, made? No way will this happen without a Palestinian state. It'll never happen. Israel normalizing relations with other Arab nations.
When I'm a little down, I just play that video at home for myself and make myself feel good for just a moment. But more seriously, we couldn't have foreseen precisely how this would go either. And to your point about extending this to other nations, it takes real leaders. We were blessed. We had Mohammed bin Zayed. We had the Crown Prince and the leadership in Bahrain. We had President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, all of whom were working this problem and could see that their country would be better off. Yeah. We shouldn't forget the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman. And while they've not signed on, they were important in making sure that everybody understood that this would be something that was palatable and acceptable in the holy sites of Mecca and Medina as well. And so a complicated history resolved by just common sense and goodwill and amazing leadership. And so it required, too, a United States that was deeply pro-Zionist, that deeply understood the historic importance of the nation of Israel. When you create a separation or countries aren't sure if you're going to be with the Israelis or going to negotiate with the Iranians, you can't extend the Abraham Accords. These are a part of a mosaic that is important, and you have to get all the pieces right. And we were very blessed that we had the right leaders in place at our embassy and all across the world that built this mosaic and got this outcome. I pray that we find more space to continue to expand peace in the Middle East. It's entirely possible, and it's a good thing for everyone.
Yeah, gentlemen, it seems like Saudi Arabia would be the big one. I know that in interviewing Prime Minister Netanyahu for TBN, he said that would be a quantum leap if we were to make peace with Saudi Arabia. And by the way, this is not your first rodeo, Route 60. You were also stars of the great TBN documentary, The Abraham Accords, incredible 4-part series featuring Secretary Pompeo, Ambassador Friedman, former President Trump, former Vice President Pence, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Arab leaders, many others in that incredible 4-part TBN documentary, The Abraham Accords. You can watch that on demand at tbn.org. And of course, visit Route60.movie September 18th and 19th. The film, it's finally here, Route 60, the biblical highway. For a former Secretary of State, former ambassador to Israel, to kind of, I don't want to say let your hair down a little bit, but hey, you're rolling those sleeves up, you're kind of on the ground, and it's not politics 24/7 that you're talking about. You're kind of getting down to the essence of it, the spiritual essence of the land of Israel. It is completely unique, and we're so proud at TBN that this film is coming to fruition and that you are both part of it. David, can you speak to that uniqueness of this project. Again, I'm not saying this lightly. There has not been anything like this with the players involved, the subject matter, to hit the screen.
You know, Eric, not only has there never been a film made by a former Secretary of State and ambassador to Israel on this territory, or any territory, frankly, in Israel, no Secretary of State or ambassador, other than the two of us, have ever set foot in any of this territory. I mean, this is a one-of-a-kind film, and the land, of course, has been there for 3,000 years or 4,000 years. The land has been there forever, but the opportunity for the two of us to show it off, I think, is both unique and a real labor of love.
You can't help yourselves. You're making history again. You did it while you're in office. Now you're doing it again with this film, Route 60, the biblical highway. Gentlemen, final thoughts. This was great. The film is absolutely stunning, visually stunning. The stories, the history, absolutely incredible. Final thoughts here, and talk about some of the places that you hit that were near and dear to your heart. All of them, obviously, but anything that jumped out in particular. I know we've talked about Joshua's altar, which is an amazing site, off the beaten path, quite literally, in Samaria. But talk about some of your favorite moments. And is there anything, well, I'm sure you learned a lot from some of the spots that you visited, anything that really jumped out to you where you said, wow, and it was kind of a game changer for you? You get the tough one first.
You know, I don't want to choose favorites because I love them all. I think there are a few places that really demonstrate the triumph and the tragedy of the Jewish people. One of which I think is Bethel. You know, there's a million towns in America called Bethel, right? Because it's such a significant place. Now we think of Bethel as the place where Jacob, you know, dreamed of angels ascending and descending from a ladder, going up to heaven, and he was given this covenant by God that he'd become a great nation. You know, sometime later, you know, when you know Bethel became it was taken over by a sort of a non-God-fearing king, and it became a duplicate tabernacle compared to the one in Jerusalem by King Jeroboam. And what does he do? He goes and because he doesn't have the Ark of the Covenant anymore, what does he do? Second place, he goes out and builds another golden calf. Can you imagine that? The second golden calf. But it just shows you how the pathway to God and to God-fearing, at least for the Jewish people, there are always these temptations along the road, and we have to conquer them. We have to be able to control them. And you know, it's a great lesson that, you know, you think you have things under control, you think you're on the right path. Don't be so sure. You know, check yourself. You know, check your direction. You know, check your coordinates. You know, all the time to make sure you're doing the right thing, because you know it's the potential to slip is always there, and we got to be careful about it. I think Bethel is a great example to me of both that triumph with Jacob and that low point with Jeroboam.
I think of the parallels here with the United States, to whom much is given, much is required. Great point there, Ambassador Friedman. Secretary, one of the things that struck me about the film is you look like you're having fun. You both did. You had a smile on your face throughout, and you're like, man, I'm really standing here. It seemed like you had a blast with Route 60. What were some of the most memorable moments for you?
You know, it was a lot of fun, but it was also so reinforcing for all the things that I've spent my life as I tried to learn to understand the Bible and to read it, and then, you know, the duty to teach it when I was a 5th grade Sunday school teacher, where cartoons and pictures. Now I was standing in these places, and even places that I'd been before. So we went to Gethsemane, a place that, you know, a lot of folks who go to visit Israel can get to. It's pretty easily accessible. I mean, we all know that story. But to go to Gethsemane after having now walked in these other places provided a connectedness to the Bible that was really special and unique. And that was certainly personal. I think when you watch Route 60, when you go see the movie, I think people will become connected to their faith, to their history, to their understanding of the Bible in ways that'll be different and fun and joyous for them as well.
It's a faith builder. I think the film is a faith builder for people watching, and you've both been strong believers for years. But I think for people watching at home as well, wow, to see it all come to life before your very eyes, incredible.
Look, you know, the whole story of the Old Testament is God's covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that they will inherit the land, right? He doesn't say to them, believe in me and go off, wherever you want. You're going to inherit this land. This land is tied to our faith. And what is the punishment to the Jewish people when God says, if you don't believe in me, I'm going to throw you out of the land, right? I mean, it's always about the land. Judaism without the land, it's not complete. And so, it's not only as a faith builder, it is the essence of our faith that we will be on this land and flourish on this land and observe God's will on this land.
Yeah, absolutely incredible journey along Route 60, the biblical highway, September 18th and 19th. Gentlemen, you're excited about this release. I know we were talking before the interview, and you guys are really psyched up for this.
Yeah. Completely.
It's going to be
completely psyched up.
It's going to be great.
Hey, I'm Mati Shoshani, and thank you for watching the TBN Israel YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you greater understanding of Israel and her people. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to share what you've learned and ask your questions in comments below. And invite your friends to join the conversation.